Okay, Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos 97. We're going to start on the top of 97a, around 10 lines from the top. It said in our Mishnah, if whether a boy was 9 years old or 20 years old, he's considered to be like a minor until he gets the signs, i.e., the pubic hair. So the Gemara says, but why do you mean 9 or 20? Viraminu, but we have a contradictory source which states Ben Esrim Shana, even if he's 20 years old, or 97a at the top of the page, around 10 lines from the top, even if he's 20 years old, if he hasn't brought two hairs, two genitalia hairs, Yaviu Raya Shu Ben Esrim, he has to bring a proof that he's 20 years old, Vua Saris, and then he's considered a Saris, and means to say that he's considered this person who's not capable of having children. And he doesn't do chalitza or yibum. And so we see from here that he's an adult. He's not considered a minor because once he reaches the age of 20, if he doesn't have the hair, we say we don't view you as a child, we view you as an adult. And so therefore, and the woman will be exempt from yibum or chalitza. And also, if it's a batis from shana. Also, if she's 20 years old, Cyrus, and she hasn't put forth the two signs of being an adult, the two hairs. Yaviu Raya Shibasis from, bring a proof she's 20. The islandess, and then she's considered an islandess, an adult who's exempt from yibum or chalitza and lo chalitza, so misyabemes. So why and she doesn't do chalitza yibum? So why were you saying that that even if he's 20, he still needs to get the signs of puberty in order to be an adult? We say when you're 20, you're considered a Swiss or an islandess, and you're exempt from yibum or chalitza. Where it says, who should know the simani strip? It's not enough to be 20 years old and not have the sign and not have the pubic hair in order to become considered a Swiss. You also have to have the other signs, which we did earlier in our Gemara. Right? For example, what are those other signs? Like, for example, you sweat a lot. If you're that you sweat a lot, you have a high voice. These are signs of being a Swiss. The Gemara listed elsewhere. The Gemara listed these signs. So the Gemara says, it says he is a Swiss. Shmamina. We see from here that you have the signs of being a Swiss in addition to not having the signs of puberty. The Gemara says, and if you don't have those signs of being a Swiss, what age do you reach before we say that you're an adult? So the Gemara says, once you reach the majority of your life, if you still don't have the signs of being a Swiss and you don't have the hair, the two hairs, then we say you're an adult. That's when you reach the majority of your life. What's your majority of your life? So the commentaries say 35 years old and one day. Some say 35 years old and a month. Once you reach 35, according to the Talmud, you're on the downhill trajectory of your life. So I'm basically very much on the downhill. I'm on the other side of the mountain. It goes very fast, boys. You don't have a lot of time. So that's what it says, 35 in a day. The Rebbe, he says, so there was a person, the Rava, they brought a person in front of Rabba or Rava who didn't have the sign, he didn't have the pubic hair. Rashi says he was Ben Chav Shana, he was 20 years old, he had not brought forth the hair, and they wanted to check him if he was still a child, and that's why he didn't have the pubic hair, or else because maybe he was an adult and he was a Swiss. So what did Rabba do? He was basically the endocrinologist of that time. He said, Amar Lahu, he said to them, Ziu Abrayu. He said, if he's a puny kid, Amar Lahu Ziu Abrayu, go fatten him up. Vibari, and if he's a very healthy kid, Amar Lahu Ziu Achishu, cut his diet a little bit. The Hani Siman and these signs, i.e. the two hairs, Zimnin Dinatri Machmas Kachishusa, the Zimnin Dinatri Machmas Priyusa. Sometimes they're delayed because he doesn't eat enough, and sometimes they're delayed because he eats too much. So that's the essence of what they said. Okay, and now we start the very, very complicated chapter called Noisin Ala Anutza. What is this chapter? This chapter is called this 11th chapter of Yevamos is called Noisin al Anusa. So there's two terms that we're going to define in the beginning. One is called an Anusa, and one is called a Mafuta. An Anusa is a woman who basically it's called seduction. You have a relationship with her outside of marriage. Mafuta is also a sexual relationship outside of marriage, but it was done against her will. And so
Rabbi?
Yes.
A quick question. So if you are, you've reached the age of 35 and you still don't have two pubic hairs or other signs of maturity, does that mean that you're unable to marry that whole period of time because you're unable to produce children?
No, it does not mean that. It does not. You could marry, but we're talking here about the laws of Yibum and Chalitza. That's what we were talking. That you would still say the person would have to do Yibum, and we're waiting for this person to become an adult to do the Yibum. So the woman or the man would have to wait. So that's what we were saying.
Wow.
Okay. So let's start the next chapter. Noisin al Anusa. So we say that if a person has had a relationship with a woman, the mafuta, let's say this anusa mafuta relationship, this sexual relationship, he's still allowed to marry. Since they weren't married, he could marry. Since he didn't actually marry this woman, he's allowed to marry her mother, her sister, or daughter, because you're only not allowed to marry your mother, or the mother or sister or daughter of your wife. But if it was just a sexual encounter, that doesn't prohibit the marriage. But if you're married to a woman, then you're liable if you have a seduction, a ones, or a mafuta relationship with a woman's sister, mother, and daughter. Even though you don't actually marry her, it's still prohibited at that point. So too says the Mishnah. No, say adam anusas aviv mafutas aviv. A person is allowed to marry his father's anusa or mafuta. Just because your father was with her as, let's say, his girlfriend, doesn't mean that you can't marry her. You're allowed to marry her. Mafutas anusas beno mafutas beno, and you're also allowed to marry your sons anusa or mafuta. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda oser banusas avim mafutas avim. Rabbi Yehuda prohibits you from marrying your father's anusa or your father's mafuta. So the Gemara says, Tanina lahaditan rabbanan. We have a brisa which states exactly what we just learned. What did the brisa say? Anas isha wants you, if you have assaulted a woman. Anas is seduced. If you had been with a woman, you seduced her. Mutar lisa bita. You're allowed to still marry your daughter. But nasa isha. But if you married her, also lisa bita. You're not allowed to marry her daughter. So if once you marry the woman, you can't marry her daughter. So it says the Gemara, but we have a contradiction to this. Let's say there's, as Dov Bear said here, let's say there's the hawk. The rumors on the street are that you're dating this woman. Then it says you're not allowed to marry her mother, her sister, or daughter. What's the reasoning? Because the Gemara is going to say, but anyway, we have a contradiction, because according to our Mishnah, if you had a relationship with a woman but it wasn't married, you could still marry your mother, sister, or daughter. But according to this brisa, once you have a relationship with one, you can't marry the mother, sister, or daughter. So the Gemara says midrabanan. It means rabbinically. Rabbinically, they made a decree that if you have like a relationship with one woman, you can't marry her mother, sister, or daughter. And the reason is because we're worried that after you marry your daughter, the mother's going to come. She's going to come to visit the daughter, and then it'll get into a prohibited relationship. And so therefore, that's why we say rabbinically. So the Gemara says, so that's why the rabbis prohibited. So the Gemara asks the question, so the rabbis ask the question, you mean to say every time that the Mishnah says that there's a prohibition rabbinically, and it's not biblically prohibited, would our Mishnah say that you're allowed to do this? No sin is an expression of lichat chila. That means you can even do this initially speaking, but we just said rabbinically you're not allowed to do it. So you mean to say that the Mishnah is only speaking, the Mishnah is not speaking lichat chila, the Mishnah is speaking biblically, so it shouldn't have used that language. So the Gemara says, kitinam nasnisen, when our Mishnah is talking about it's achar misa, means to say you had a relationship with a woman. Then she dies, and after she dies, you can marry her daughter or mother or sister. That's what our Mishnah is talking about, and that's even lechatchila. Okay, so the Gemara, because then there's no concern about the adultery. But if you had married her, you can't marry your mother, sister. You can't marry your mother or daughter after the death. Gemara says, how do we know these laws that were listed in our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Minani Mili. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you how we know this law. Now, how do we know that the Torah says that you're only not allowed to marry the relatives if you had actual betrothal with one? Then there's a prohibition on marrying the other. The Gemara says the Tana Rabbanan, because it says Bikuan by all the sexual prohibitions in the Torah. It says by, let's say, your daughter-in-law, your aunt, or an animal. It says Nemar Shechiva. It says the word to lie with. It says V'isha Sher Yishkavet Kalaso. But by a mother and by a woman and her mother, it says V'kan Nemar Kicha. It says the word Kicha, to take. It says, for example, Isha Sher Yikachas Isha Ve'esima. Well, Marloch Derech Likuchin Asratar. Let's tell us that only if you had married them are you then prohibited to marry their relative. So Papa, if that's the case, that the expression of Kicha implies that only if you marry them do their relatives become prohibited. Gabe Achoso, by a sister, a man who actually Yikach marries his sister. Achinami Hudaser, Derech Kichudaser, Derech Shtivashari. Do you want to say it's only prohibited to be with your sister if you marry her, but if you just want to not be with her but without marrying her, will be permitted? You think so? So the Gemara says, if the Torah just writes the word lakicha and doesn't explain its intent, means it means to say in a place where it's capable of marriage, then it refers to marriage. But but if it's a place where you're not capable of marriage, like a sister, then it just implies sleeping with and not actually marrying. Rava says, let's learn something else from our Mishnah, because Anas Isha Mutar Lisabita, if it says if you're with a woman, you're allowed to marry your daughter. And he says, we're going to learn this out from here. Mehacha, we learn that from this source. It says, the nakedness of your granddaughter, your son of your daughter, the daughter of your son, or the daughter of your daughter, you're not allowed to reveal. And the implication of this verse is that only the daughter of your son is prohibited. Habas bina dida, but doesn't that imply the daughter of his wife from another, the daughter of his wife, if he had married and his wife had a daughter from another man, or bas bita dida, golly, you would be allowed to marry. But then there's another verse which states, which implies that other relationship is also prohibited. So if you had just had an ones relationship with a woman, then if she had a daughter from another marriage, then you would be allowed to marry her. But if you had a Nisuin relationship, if you married her, you wouldn't. Gemara says, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's just the opposite. Gemara says, Arayos she'er ksivu. By the term of Arayos, it says relatives. So b'nisuin d'ikasher ba'onsin leikasher. So by nisuin, there's relatives, and therefore it's prohibited. By ones, there's no relatives, and therefore it's not prohibited. Now we say Rabbi Yehuda says, Oser ba'nusas aviv mufusa aviv. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to marry the anusa of your father if your father slept with a woman or his mafuta. So Rabbi Yehuda argues with the Tana Kama. Amar Rav Gida Amar Rav, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reasoning for Rabbi Yehuda? He says, "Kisiv or yikachas eishes aviv v'lo yigaleh kanaf aviv." You're not allowed to marry your father's wife, or you're not allowed to reveal the kanaf of your father. So what does that mean? Kanaf shara aviv v'lo yigaleh. The garment that your father saw, you're not allowed to reveal. You're not allowed to marry. Mar says, and how do we know it's referring to an anusa? How do we know it's referring to a case where your father had a girlfriend? The Gemara says, because what's the earlier verse? The previous verse is referring to an anusa. It says that he shall give to the man who slept with her The man who slept with her shall give to her father 50 silver coins. That's referring to a case of anus, of seduction. The Rabbanan say, the rabbis say, if it would be directly next to each other, if the verses would be exactly next to each other, I would agree with you. But the verses are interrupted by a few words. Therefore, we need to use this verse like Ravanan taught. Amar Ravanan, Amar Shmuel. The Torah is referring to the Shomeres Yavam of his father. That's what it's referring to. That if your father had a Shomeres Yavam, it means to say your father was waiting to do Yibam with a woman, and you slept with, and then that's the woman you're not allowed to sleep with. Umay kinaf aviv, kinaf haraoil aviv lo. A woman who was basically had a connection to marry your father, that's the one you're not allowed to marry. So if she was a Shomeres Yavam, if she had ever at any point been waiting to do Yibam with your father, you know how to marry her. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. So the Gemara says, but anyway, she's going to be prohibited. Your father's Shomeres Yavam is also your uncle's wife. And anyway, your uncle's wife is always prohibited to you. So the Gemara says, we want to say she's prohibited by 2 prohibitions. But anyway, she's going to be prohibited because she has to wait Yibum, and she's not allowed to be with anybody. The Gemara says, we want to show that you're violating 3 prohibitions. Or maybe after his father dies, meaning to say, the Torah is saying that this prohibition applies even after your father dies and Shomeres Yavam expires. Okay, so now we are on the top of 97b, and the Gemara is going to bring a whole bunch of riddles, which Tosfos says here that you only need to know how to answer them in order to know how to answer the Sadducees, because you'll see that these are ridiculous scenarios. And I was even thinking about it. I'm like, why are these even in the Talmud? I was even thinking that, excuse me for saying it, I just didn't understand it. But Tosfos says we need to know how to answer the Sadducees. Okay, so now they're very complicated. You might need to write it down on a piece of paper and figure it out on your own. But if you're eating your breakfast, you might spit it out. So now's a good time to pause. So the first case is that a woman comes along and says, "Ach me'av v'lo me'em." She says, "This is my paternal brother and not my maternal brother. V'hu bala de'em, and he is my mother's husband. V'ana barta de'ante, and I am the daughter of his wife." Yeah, that's exact. He's my paternal brother, not my maternal brother. He's my mother's husband, and I am the daughter of his wife. So Amar Rabbi Chama, the local Rabbi Yehuda de Maslisin. That's not like Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, because Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to marry your father's girlfriend. So what's this case? So the case is as follows. Rashi tells us, Yaakov, follow along. I don't want to have to say this multiple times because it's repulsive even. In fact, the Meiri, when he describes it, he doesn't even use Jewish names for this because the whole thing is so repulsive. Meiri doesn't even use Jewish names. So let's just say the case. Yaakov marries Sarah, and they give birth to Reuven, okay? And then Yaakov goes and has Rivka as his anusa, as his girlfriend. And they give birth to Rachel. And now Reuven, who is Yaakov's son from another wife, comes along and marries Rivka, his father's girlfriend. And Rachel says to Reuven, "You're my brother from my father," because they're both the children of Jacob. And she says, "And you're also my mother's husband." So, and that's not like Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, because Rabbi Yehuda would say Reuven can't marry his father's girlfriend. Fine. That was the simplest case. Now up to the next one. Achu, she says, you're my brother, and also Brihu, you're also my son. You're my brother and my son, and Achte Ana Dahai Darina Kafai. And I'm what? We're gonna see how it is. We're gonna see, and then also you say, I'm also the sister of the one that I'm carrying on my shoulders. So the Gemara says, Mishkachasla. You can have this scenario if you have an idolater who has a relationship with his daughter, and he gives birth to a son. So basically, so what's the scenario? So the scenario is that a man has slept with his daughter, and they give birth to a son, and that daughter says that her son is also her brother. That's the case. Okay. Okay, now we go to the third one. So, third one is Shlama lecha b'ri. She says to her son, "Peace upon you, my son. Peace upon you, my son." Why? Bas achatech ana. I am the daughter of your sister. She says, "Peace upon you, my son. I am the daughter of your sister." So mishtachasla va'ovikochavim abal bat bito. This is where an idolater has relations with his granddaughter. And when he has relations with the granddaughter, he gives birth to a son from her. This son is her paternal brother, his granddaughter's paternal brother, because this son. And his mother says that she is the daughter of the daughter and the daughter of your sister from your father. So, yeah. Okay, next case. This is the fourth parable. You have all the drawings. If you have different versions of the Gemara, you'll have the drawings in front of you. You can look at it. The fourth case is the woman says to the workers who are drawing out the water from the field, and she says, "I'm going to ask you this riddle. Lipo b'chu seiser peser. Here I have a riddle, and answer it. The Haida Darina, this child that I'm carrying on my shoulder, Hubar, he's my son. Va'ana barat achua, and I am the daughter of his brother. He's my son, and I'm the daughter of his brother. Okay, how could that be? He's my son, and I am the daughter of his brother. Where it says Mishkachas la va'olik chavim ma'bal bas b'no. You could have that scenario if you have an idolater who has relations with the daughter of his son. And then they give birth to a son. This son is her brother, it's her paternal brother. And the woman is saying that she is the daughter of the son. She's the daughter of your brother. Okay. Fifth parable. Biaya. This is she cries out. Me'ach, I cry out for my brother. V'hu av, he's also my father. My brother is my father. V'hu baal, and he's also my husband. V'hu bar baal, and he's also the son of my husband. V'hu baal de'im, and he's also the husband of the mother of Ana Barte de Isase, and I'm the daughter of his wife. V'lo pita, and he doesn't give bread. And he doesn't give bread to his brothers, the orphans, there, because they're also the sons of his daughter. How do we have this scenario? Okay, mishkachas, you have this. If you have an idolater, by the way, they're going to take, if any of you guys want to go to law school, they're going to ask you these questions when you apply. So they say, you can have this scenario, mishkachas if there's an idolater who has relations with his mother, and then he has a daughter. So he has relations with his mother, and then he has a daughter, and that daughter, and then he has relations again with that daughter, so he's also marries her, but so she's his daughter, but she's also his sister. And the father of that idolater, Boaz, now has relations with that daughter, who is his now his wife, his daughter-in-law, and his daughter, and he has children from her. Okay, the sixth parable. Anav at achi, I and you are brothers. Anav avuchachai, I and your father are brothers. Ana va'imach achei, I and your mother are brothers. We're brothers. I'm brothers with you, with your father, and with your mother. So how can that be? We can have it with an idolater who has relations with his mother. He has two daughters. And he has relations with one of those daughters. He has a son. And so the sister of the mother of this son is the one who says that. She's the one who says this. Okay, you have the diagram there. Now the seventh one. Ana va'at b'nei achai. We are brothers. Ana va'avuch b'nei achi. And also I and your father are brothers. Ana v'imech b'nei achi. I and your mother are sons of brothers. How is this case possible? The Gemara says, so this is the one case which can happen in a permitted manner. How so? It could go Reuven shtei banos. It's Reuven has two daughters. Va'asa Shimon, and Reuven's brother Shimon comes to Nasef Chadaminai. He marries one of his brother's daughters, which is allowed. You can marry your niece, but you can't marry your aunt. So he marries her. Va'asa Bar Levi, and now the third brother, who's Levi, and he's Reuven's brother, Unasef Chadaminai. He marries the other daughter of Reuven. So Shimon marries one of Reuven's daughters, and Levi marries another one of Reuven's daughters. So they each marry their niece. And the Ka'amrei braid to Shimon, Lebar braid to Levi. And so Shimon's son says to Levi's grandson that he says, I and you are both the son of two sisters, the two daughters of Reuven. And I and your father are the son of Levi, because they are two brothers. And so that's the scenario. Okay, now we're up to the next Mishnah. Next Mishnah, we move on. By the way, so now you know those cases. If anybody asks you, you know how to answer to the Sadducees. Very, very, I was wondering, like, why is this even in the Gemara? But I guess they couldn't resist putting it in. I don't know why. They couldn't resist. Yeah, but these are idolaters cases. Like, it's all of them are prohibited, except for the last one and the first one. Yeah.
What was the point? What was the point of the Sadducees' question?
They said they're trying to see how smart you are. They're trying to see how smart you are.
They're just playing games.
I didn't say that, but Tosa says the reason why it's here is to say if the Sadducees ask you, you know how to respond to them. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. So I'm sure other rabbis will be able to explain it, but I don't understand it. Let's say there's a woman who converted, and her son, who she had given birth to when she was not Jewish, converted with her. And after she converted, they married women, and they converted her. So a woman converted with her sons. They also converted. And after they converted, they married women, and then they died. Then these brothers do not do chalitza or yibum, because we're going to say the reason why they don't do chalitza or yibum, because since they converted, we view them as though they were born anew. And since they were born anew, we don't view them as being technically brothers. Even if the first one was conceived not in a state of kedusha, meaning to say the first one was conceived before he converted, but he was born after his mother had already converted, and Hasheni Orasa V'Leidasa B'Kedusha, and the second one was completely conceived and born while he was Jewish. Nevertheless, we're not going to view them as brothers for the laws of Yevamos. So too a shifcha, this maid, this slave, this female slave who was freed, and her sons were freed with her. So the Gemara says the following: B'nei Yudan Amta, the children of Yudan, the maid, Ishtachwar, were freed. So Yudan's maid, B'nei Yudan Amta, the children of Yudan, the slave, were freed. So Sharilahu Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Uminsav Nesheda Dadi. So Rav Acha Bar Yaakov allowed them to each marry their brother's wives. Amarle Rava Rav Sheshes Asar. But Rav Sheshes prohibited. So Amarle who Asar Va'ana Sharina. Even though Rav Sheshes prohibited, I'm going to allow it because they weren't technically, they're like new people once they converted. So the Gemara says, under what circumstance are Rav Acha Bar Yaakov who allows it and Rav Sheshes doesn't allow it, or what are they talking about? If these were paternal brothers and not maternal brothers, everybody would admit that they can marry each other as wives once they converted. Because we're not going to be concerned under that circumstance that the people will think that also by a person who's born Jewish that that's okay, because we're going to say that by the idolaters we can't assume that we understand who the paternity is from. But if it's just maternal brothers and not paternal brothers, everybody would say it's prohibited because everybody else would look at them as though they're brothers, and then you might come to think it's permitted also by a regular Jew. Where is it? Where do they argue? Where they're both paternal and maternal brothers. Mandashari, the one who says it's allowed, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, is going to say, oh, people are going to assume Basar Abba Shadinan. People are going to assume that they're paternal brothers, and so therefore they're going to say there's no paternity by the idolater. Because they call them, oh, like you're from this family, from the man. Rav Sheshes Karlu Nami B'nei Polonis, but Rav Sheshes says no, they also say you're from the mom, and so therefore it's not going to be allowed. Some say it's like this. Pligi Bar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, Afilo Ba'achem and An. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is even arguing by maternal brothers. Umay time, and what's the reason why allows it? Because he says Gershon Iskar Kikatan Shano Adam. He says you don't have to be concerned that people are going to say that this is okay by a Jew, because a convert who converts is like a totally newborn person, and therefore all the relationships were technically severed. It doesn't mean you can't call them mom and uncle and aunt, but you're like a newborn person. Gemara says, Tanan, we learned, let's bring a proof from this case from our Mishnah. We learned in our Mishnah, that if there's a woman who converts and her children convert with her, you don't do chalitza or yibum. My time, isn't it because they're not allowed to marry their brothers' wives because they're maternal brothers? And so that's what our Mishnah is saying, that they're prohibited to marry. And so therefore they don't do chalitza or yibum because they can't do yibum because they can't marry them. Mar says, no, the Eina B'Torah chalitza yibum means that they don't have to do chalitza yibum. The Sharia Alma, and they're allowed to marry anybody else. The Inu Namu Shara, they can even marry. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said they can even marry each other's brothers there, each other's wives. Mar says, Vakatani Afilu. It says even if they were born in that case. Now, if you want to say that they're allowed to marry, that means to say even in this case they're prohibited. So even though the first one was conceived while he wasn't Jewish but born while Jewish, it's like they had two wives. Nevertheless, that they're prohibited. But if you say that they're permitted, what does it mean afilu? Gemara explains the afagav the trevoe does some biktusha even though they were both born while they were Jewish, and you might come to mix them up with another Israelite and say you're allowed to marry your brother's wife, still they allowed it. Gemara says, we'll just do one more thing. I'll stop here. Okay, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.